Hello everyone, thanks so much for tuning in. So we're going to be picking up from our last note video that I was going through my notes that the professor was going through in my microbio class. We started looking at immune disorders and we split it up into two parts. The first part was about like hypersensitivity, autoimmune, as well as immunodeficiency, and the second part to that video will be about AIDS specifically. So the AIDS epidemic, HIV, the structure of the virus, just the history of it, and the cultural aspects as well, and current advancements in ethics as well as in the scientific community to combat some of these harmful outcomes. Right, so AIDS is going to be an acronym for Acquired Immunodeficiency Syndrome. This is when there's an opportunistic or a rare infection plus HIV. There's a presence of HIV, and therefore there's an opportunistic or a rare infection happening at the same time. There's going to be AIDS in the last stage of HIV. Right, so the discovery, it was, again, when we say discovery, we're going to have to put those in air quotes. You'll see why in a bit. So discovery, again, arbitrarily, again, there's air quotes around discovery. You're given the year 1981. There's a high spike of cases in pneumocystis carni, so P. carni pneumonia, also known as PCP, and Michael Gottlieb from UCLA, he's looking at this. And then there's also high amount of requests for drugs to treat this pneumonia. The voices would be Sandra Ford of the CDC at the time. She's noticing this huge spike, these weird cases, and then a high number of requests for the drug to treat that strange pneumonia. Alright, so in 1982, we have, unfortunately, two developments here. There's an outbreak of Kaposi's sarcoma. And this outbreak, this sudden burst, was seen in young gay men. And this is strange because usually Kaposi's sarcoma affects those in elderly age brackets, not in young men. So unfortunately, there's a gay-related stigma that started circulating in the public. And before it was known as AIDS, it was called GRID. This was in 1982 when they started seeing these first sites of large outbreaks of these unusual or opportunistic infections. And back then, it was called GRID. And again, there's that whole unfortunate stigma between the LGBT and medicine because of this. So hopefully get some more advances into kind of lowering the tensions there and making sure everyone is respected. In that regard, in 1984, another advance into the study of AIDS. I should write down these dates. Not 1982. Okay, so in 1984, this is when the virus that causes AIDS is actually discovered by Gallo and the Pasteur Institute. Alright, moving on. Let's talk about the origin of AIDS. And this is going to be a zoonotic disease. We're going to be finding this virus off of the chimpanzees in southwest Cameroon. So again, zoonotic disease. So in southwest Cameroon, we have that simian immunodeficiency virus, or SIV. This is found in the chimpanzee populations here, and it's endemic to the chimpanzees. The chimpanzees are, again, some of our closest relatives on the evolutionary tree. So this is again a zoonotic virus, a zoonotic disease. It spreads to humans via bushmeat. Alright. And when that happens, we then get to other human spreading it through prostitution and vaccination campaigns without sterilizing needles. So not the vaccines themselves, just the needles that they were using weren't sterile. Unfortunately, have the advances that we know how to properly sterilize, and unfortunately some of these areas did not have access to those methods, and therefore the unsterilized needles were a source of the human-to-human spread. And over time, we're going to see this virus again. It gets artificially selected. Also, it's going to be mutating, and it adapts to the humans to become HIV. And again, this is the precursor to AIDS. So remember, you need the HIV, and then unfortunately you also will have like an opportunistic infection, and that's when it's called the acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. So from the time period of the late 1880s, we're going to actually see the HIV go around other places in Africa. Unfortunately, we're going to see West Africa get hit by some spikes. We're going to also see Congo and Cameroon also unfortunately suffer from HIV spikes. Then in 1959, we're going to have some Congolese men and women get it. And then in 1969, we're going to have HIV from Congo go into Haiti. And then from there, there's a 16-year-old African American. And I'm just trying to update. Also in 1969, there's a 16-year-old African American male named Robert Rayford, and he unfortunately dies in St. Louis City Hospital of that Kaposi sarcoma. And then again, the Kaposi sarcoma is a disease that's usually seen in the elderly, but unfortunately here's a young person who has it. And then again, this was in St. Louis. And then now the next question is, why was it discovered in quotation marks in the early 1980s? Well, in this time in U.S. history, you had changes in behavior. There are bathhouses, there's the gay liberation movement, and there's also the Canadian flight attendant theory. There's a lot of changes again in behavior in the clientele. And this, of course, increased contact will also increase the chance of getting this pathogen and any other pathogens too. We saw during COVID, a lot of people were a little bit reckless and they had parties and all these gatherings, and then we saw large spikes. So this is the same principle here. So I'm just going to update all that. So we had changes in behavior. We have drugs and prostitution, bathhouses, and then all these are going to just increase contact. And then therefore there's the increased risk of getting the pathogens. We also have, again, that Canadian flight attendant theory. There's a guy named Gaetan Dudas, and he had a ton of partners, and they linked 40 of the first 248 cases allegedly to him. So again, we talked about how when we're going to discuss diseases, sometimes we also have to look at the ethics and then social concerns, a little bit of politics, and even some statistics as well as some mathematics involved in the study of disease when you're looking at it through a bigger picture, trying to piece together all the puzzles. Well, in this time, when we're looking at the history of AIDS in America, the unfortunate spread and the unfortunate crises that were happening due to all of these diseases, we have a lot of social concerns and political ones too. So the health authorities are going to stress the use of the condoms, and then they're going to close the bathhouses. So they're going to preach for like better and healthier processes when we're talking about contact with others. You want to, again, make sure you use protection and all that. And then we have the LGBT community in the forefront of this as well. And they're going to be important voices to address a lot of these concerns that, unfortunately, a large amount of the populace was turning a blind eye against. And they did help in the advances of a lot of these aspects in the medical field, as well as in the societal viewpoints on a lot of these issues. So the LGBT community, when the health authorities were closing all these places down that they congregated and they loved to hang out at, or they spend time, this was seen as a civil rights violation. And there's a famous quote that the professor told us about to someone said, "I did not become gay to have used, just to have used condoms." And again, there's that civil rights message. All these groups, remember, this is in the 60s, the 70s, actually it peaked again in the 80s, 70s and 80s. There's still a lot of progressivism going on, and there's a lot of these groups that are just pushing for all these advances. And again, the civil rights issue is still talked about today, which is an important issue to talk about. We also have government or political views on the concerns for when AIDS is breaking out. We have President Ronald Reagan. And he didn't really talk about it until 1987. A lot of criticisms of Reagan and other people in government positions at the time, but since this is not a U.S. history class or a politics class, I'm not going to dive into that section of it. We also have Anthony Fauci, Dr. Fauci from the coronavirus pandemic. He's also involved here, just listed as another another person of authority who's involved in this crisis at the time. He was heavily criticized for not putting enough research then, but then also he was, again, he was looking at all these different pandemics and all these diseases too. There's a call for wanting to help the gay men and the gay citizens to, again, combat this disease, this AIDS, as best as they could. We want to give them support, and we want to try and find a way to make sure this epidemic doesn't hit anyone else or damage their communities. Some more statistics. There's going to be 35 million who die each year. And unfortunately, 38 million plus have HIV. Staggering, gigantic numbers that are unfortunately viewpoints into something that's extremely serious that needs more attention into, again, stopping pandemics. Sub-Saharan Africa will have the most affected individuals, unfortunately, and significant advances have been made. However, there isn't a cure. We still have those advances, so we could still work towards more advances and more treatments, but unfortunately, it cannot be cured currently. There are 3 distinct terms that we need to go over. We have HIV infection. This is when the virus enters and it replicates. We also have HIV disease. And this will cause the symptoms in about 6 weeks. The professor was telling us it's horrible with this is a lot of the symptoms actually just look like flu symptoms. And so it's kind of difficult to determine. That's why it's so important that we stay on top of all these pandemics and we try to help as many people as we can so all types of communities don't fall victim to this. Again, we saw the social concerns. We saw the LGBT community and as well as the medical and the scientific community saying, hey, we need to help these people out and make sure they're not part of this whole millions and millions of people who are unfortunately falling victim. We need to find ways to help them live fulfilling lives and protect them against pandemics, because that will strengthen all of us if we do our part to protect against pandemics. AIDS, again, will be the process where let me write it here again. So this is, again, just another kind of a definition or a way of thinking about what AIDS is. This is when there's going to be the destruction of T cells. And that's our adaptive immunity. And the T cell count will fall below 200 out of a microliter. 200 cells out of a microliter. That's when it's too low. This is going to cause the systems to lose function. And there's going to be specific opportunistic infections now present. These opportunistic infections will include pneumocystis, Kaposi sarcoma, which we've talked about, herpes, disseminated herpes, and then a few others. ARC is an AIDS-related complex. And this is seen with lost weight and diarrhea. Alright, now let's talk about the kind of the process or the timeline of when there's a HIV disease, the progression. Okay, so we have this one line here. I'm just gonna talk about it. It's red, it's going to be up, then it goes down, and then we go up a steep plateau again. So this red line is the culturable HIV in the infected person. The first stage would be that acute retrovirus syndrome. Then we go to asymptomatic, and then we get to AIDS. Again, AIDS is the last stage. In acute, we also have the lymphocytes. The lymphocytes are going to be scoping down. They're going to increase a bit, and then we're just going to have a giant decrease in the lymphocytes. Remember, the T cell count is falling below 200 per microliter, so that's why we have that decrease. And then we also have a green line for the RNA of the HIV virus. So in the acute retroviral syndrome, it's going to be high, and then it's going to stoop down once we're going into asymptomatic, and then it's actually going to climb, just like the culturable HIV in this progression. Alright, let's talk about the HIV virus and its structure. So the HIV virus is a retrovirus. A retrovirus has the reverse transcriptase. It's the single-stranded RNA. There are 2 copies of the ssRNA, and it's around a protein capsid. There's going to be a surface glycoprotein. And this surface glycoprotein is going to be attaching to the CD4 cell. The core has the matrix, the capsid, and the nucleocapsid. The core also has these 3 enzymes. We have the reverse transcriptase, again, that's going to take the RNA and then move it into DNA. There's protease. Actually, I should have made that a 1, my bad. So 1 is the reverse transcriptase, number 2 is protease, and number 3 is integrase. Should have really wrote the abbreviations too, but it's just PR and IN. There we go. Okay, the first step on how HIV will infect will of course be the attachment phase. In attachment, the GP120, also known as the SU, attaches to the CD4 plus receptor of a CD4 plus cell. Okay, so now the co-receptor binding will follow. This co-receptor needs either CCR5 or CXCR4. And then when we have membrane fusion, this is the viral entry. Again, that surface glycoprotein is going to attach to CD4+, but then we also have this co-receptor CXCR4 or CCR5. If we could target that co-receptor, if we could target this, then we block the virus from even attaching to a cell, which would be really, really helpful in future advances if we're able to attack or block that co-receptor there. Attachment and entry is next. This is when DNA synthesis happens from the RNA, of course. This is going to be from the reverse transcriptase. The copy will go into the host nucleus. And then we have the integrase, our third protein actually. This is going to insert the DNA into the host chromosome. Now, the provirus is permanent in the genome. Provirus is permanent at this stage. Alright, now let's talk about the epidemiology of HIV and AIDS. Gonna switch to a different color. So one of the ways that HIV or AIDS are spread be sexual contact. So this is when blood mixes and other bodily fluids. The HIV enters through the mucosa, and this is via the lesions. The risk of transmission is greater in anal versus vaginal sex, so there's another risk there. In blood products, there's also a risk for HIV or AIDS here from the IV drug abusers or sharing needles. Yes, highlight some of these things. There we go. Healthcare workers by a needle stick. And there's going to be screened blood products, and then the contaminated ones aren't used. We also have vertical transmission. In vertical transmission, this is when it will go, unfortunately, from the mom to the fetus. And it's going to go through the birth canal, and then it's also going to then originate from breastfeeding. It's not spread, however, by casual contact, bug bites, sweat, urine, tears. All these things will not spread HIV or AIDS. Tears, casual contact, bug bites, sweat, or urine. Okay, so now we get to some treatments that are being advanced in and being used currently. So we have the antiretrovirals, or those that block. Again, we need to block that co-receptor CCR5s. We need to block them to prevent attachment. We could also block the reverse transcriptase and the other enzymes. With drugs, there's also the HAART. This is a combination of 3 drugs. These are 2 RTIs plus a protease inhibitor or an NNRTI. And one's highlighted. I'm going to just highlight treatments as well. Okay, so the purpose of combining these 3 inhibitors be to defend multiple sites at once, and unfortunately, again, we currently do not have a cure for HIV. These are treatments, though, and prevention. Okay, so now you go into prevention. We prevent the risk of AIDS by reducing sexual contact using monogamy, condoms, hygiene, avoid herpes sores, and then those who test positive for other diseases too. Always use protected anal sex, and then again, condoms are another thing to be using, especially. Preventing the transmission in blood. How do we lower that risk? We're going to be sterilizing objects. Needle programs as well, and then also education on the disease itself. And then vertical transmission can be prevented by antiretrovirals, no breastfeeding, and the C-section if needed. And then some closing notes. AIDS worldwide. Most of the cases, 85% of the cases, are heterosexual individuals. This is going to be hitting communities in sub-Saharan Africa the hardest, unfortunately. And there's going to be advances again, and hopefully a push for accessibility for treatments. And then also vaccines are in development as of making this video. And hopefully those vaccines will be effective, low cost, stable, and accessible to a wide amount of people. Alright, thanks so much for tuning in for that second part to it. Sorry, like an 18 plus disclaimer on the video there. I'm going to add one in the title just in case, and then in the description. And yeah, thanks so much for tuning in. Please have a good rest of the evening and do something nice for someone. Take care.